Maybe you could think about this story like you would a half-hour television show. There's a script, it has scenes, it has locations. It begins in the temple before the high priest in Jerusalem. That's scene one. The second scene, which she read from, is about this journey. It was Saul with a handful, perhaps, of others that were aiding him, a little entourage, and they're on an assignment. Go up to Damascus. Damascus is northeast of Jerusalem. I don't know how far it is. It's in another country today. It's in Syria. But there's a road that goes up there, and that's what they're on, where this thing happens. There's a dilemma. Meanwhile, a third scene is happening almost simultaneous with the last scene that she read about because it takes place in Damascus itself. Now in Damascus, there was a disciple by the name of Ananias. Do we know anything at all about him? Not really. He's kind of a no-name. The Lord spoke to him in a dream, calling him by his name. You realize how strange that is? Almost as if he's asleep and in a dream. Called him by name, to which he rises up and says, I am here, Lord. Then the Lord said to him, get up and go down this street called Straight, and inquire at the house of Judas for a man named Saul from Tarsus. So these two stories are coming together in this particular moment. At this moment, Saul is praying, and he sees in his mind's eye a man by the name of Ananias. There's a simultaneous quality to this story right now. And placing his hands upon him to restore his sight. Saul can't see a thing, and yet God speaks to him about this. And Ananias said, Lord, I've heard on all hands about this man and how much harm he has done to your holy people in Jerusalem. Why, even now he holds powers from other chief priests to arrest all who call upon your name. But the Lord said to him, go on your way, for this man is my chosen instrument to bear my name before the Gentiles and their kings, as well as to the sons of Israel. Indeed, I myself will show him what he must suffer for the sake of my name. You realize what's going on here is these two stories that come together. The people who are what we would call Christians today, converts, they're not known by that yet. This predates even the designation that they're called Christians, followers of Christ. This is so early in this transition from the Judaism of what the story has hung its hat on until now it is an emerging something. Is there a church? Not really. They hang out together in one another's homes. These people who aren't even called Christians yet come together and they share their identity. Then Ananias set out and went to the house. There's no church to go to, there's only a house. And he laid his hands upon Saul and said, Saul, brother Saul, he calls him, the Lord has sent me, Jesus who appeared to you on your journey here so that you might recover your sight and be filled with the Holy Spirit. And immediately something like scales fell from Saul's eyes and he could see again. He got to his feet. They baptized him. Then he took some food and he regained his strength. And Saul stayed with the disciples in Damascus for some time. Nobody yet knew who this was. No one recognized him by the name of Paul yet. That is yet to come. And without delay, he began to proclaim Jesus in the synagogues. He's still very, very Jewish. And yet all he wants to talk about when he goes to the synagogue is this one called Jesus. People were staggered. And they kept saying between themselves, "Isn't this the man who so bitterly persecuted those who called on the name in Jerusalem and came down here with the sole object of taking back all such people as prisoners before the chief priest?" We're in an in-between time right now. Resurrection Sunday was a couple of Sundays ago, and in this period, it's actually 50 days according to the New Testament. In this 50-day period, 7 weeks, we go through this transition of sorts, and the stories are very raw and fresh in that kind of way. They are transitional stories. And what is just over the horizon that they can't quite see yet is what is called Pentecost, which means 50 days. This 50-day period, they're days of surprise, when God uses ordinary people and the events of ordinary life to do extraordinary things. And today is a mind-boggling tale when the early church's chief hater, this is the guy who had more hatred for the emerging church than anyone in the world at that time. He was clinical in his ability to hate and to destroy the followers of Jesus. And he's on his way to Damascus. He has a certain amount of manacles with him. How many do you think he had? 10? 15? He had manacles with him that he would bind up the Christian followers in Damascus, bind them up, and then carry them back to Jerusalem, where he would present them like a hunting trip to the chief priest, who were opposed to the Christian movement. There was a name for the Christian movement. It wasn't called Christianity. It was called the Way. And Saul at the time, had this idea of terrorizing them. It almost sounds very modern in the way this guy took it as his call in life to go and to terrorize the followers of Jesus, the followers of the Way. And there are 2 ways, don't you know, about making a change in life. Here we get one of them. It's abrupt, it is decisive. Saul is knocked off of his what? Horse, maybe? He's riding, and all of a sudden he finds himself on the ground. He's knocked off. When he hits the ground, he can no longer see. So he rises up, he sits up, and he can't see anymore. When we think about making changes in life, transitions in life, there are basically 2 ways to do that. One is very abrupt. One is something happens and the whole direction of your life changes, and you find yourself now going in a new direction. The very first church I pastored in San Antonio, Texas, my associate, who was the minister of music, arts and music and such, his son had a change in life as he was in his car driving out west past Texas. I think he was in Arizona. And you know, there's not much. Talk about having a desert experience. That's the direction to go, to have a desert experience. All of a sudden, in the late afternoon, the sun right there in his face, some new way of thinking hit him. Some change needed to be made. He went from being David, he called himself Phoenix. That's a great name for someone who's making a change. I came along, I showed up as their pastor a month or 2 after that. I had no trouble at all calling him Phoenix. But my colleague, his father kept calling him David, his old life. He had such a dramatic change in life. He went from being David to being Phoenix. He imagined himself as being in transition. He was 23, 24. He was the perfect age. He was free enough to be able to drive out into the desert. And something about the logistics of his life began to change, and they came together in this extraordinary new way. That's one way to make a change in life. Maybe you have made an abrupt change sometime before. I tend to think things out. I'm very methodical. I'm slow about making changes. Here's the other vision of what that's like. The old-time singing group called the Willis Family. Does that ring a bell? Some of you who remember this, described in an old trucking song. Give me 40 acres and I'll turn this rig around. 40 acres, that's a lot of land to make a change. It's a slow change. It's not dramatic. Some of you are like that. I'm more like that myself. Some of you are more like Phoenix. And when you make a decision, it's just like that, and it means everything. And everything about your life changes. Mine changes incrementally. Little decision here, little decision there. Saul's turn was fast and furious as he did a dramatic 180. By the time he hit the ground, he was changing. Could no longer see. He was in the hands of Christian believers who were caring for him. They were very carefully taking care of him. They did not want to tick him off because he might have them killed or tortured. Timothy, young Timothy as he's called in the New Testament, had a very different approach. It was more gradual. And here's how Paul, later the Apostle Paul, described Timothy. How from infancy is the phrase that's used. He knew the Holy Scriptures, which are able to make you wise through faith in Jesus Christ. This is the letter to Timothy that Paul writes. He is writing in recognition of the way Timothy himself went through some changes in order to become a servant of Christ. And young Timothy honestly could not remember a time when he wasn't a believer. And some of us, I say some of us, my life has been generally this way, that my life in faith has followed a path that was well established very early in life. I don't remember a dramatic 180 change in direction. And yet both stories seem to be legitimate. Different people go different paths in life. And if you're going to find your way toward being a follower of Christ, you'll follow one path or the other. Maybe Saul's dramatic conversion story is a model of conversion that describes who you are. Maybe you've been the one that when you fell off your pony and hit the ground, your life was changed. Maybe it's been more slow and gradual. It would be helpful for us to remember that while the DRE, the Damascus Road experience, is one of many paths that people take on their journey, there are other paths of Christian transformation to follow. And part of the drama of this story is baked into the story from Saul's pre-conversion reputation. He was a feared character following Jesus' 3-year ministry. He was the guy that you did not want to show up at your door to check on you, to figure out who you are. And his story of transformation stands in contrast, stark contrast, to his reputation of being a fearmongerer. The Christian community knew who he was. They kept track of him and where he was and where he was headed because he was a man of violence. He's described in Acts 7 at the stoning of Stephen. Stephen is one of the earliest believers And who's there holding the cloaks for those who are throwing the rocks? It's Saul, young Saul. He is a true believer. He is the one that they could depend on to carry out some kind of sentencing. He may not have thrown any rocks that day, but there are other days when it takes someone to stimulate a good stoning. He was the one to do that. He was a true believer. But this story is not about Saul turned Paul alone. The story also has, at the same time, simultaneously, has the collection of believers in Damascus who know that he's coming. And when he shows up and he's blind, and they know God is doing something in his life, it did not make them not fear him. They couldn't conceive yet the sense of transformation that was going on. Saul breathed threats of murder, and the community of believers in Damascus knew that he was approaching. One of the persons in modern time that helps me understand this story is Robert Johnson. He's a Jungian psychologist, and he speaks metaphorically of what he calls the slender threads. The slender threads are any unplanned gift or curse of circumstance that alters the trajectory of your life. You know your life is going one direction, and then all of a sudden, something happens, and something bumps you off of that course and pushes you in a new direction. He calls these the slender threads. These are the slender threads, are those happenstances that you don't control, but that control you. All of us at some time or another experience the way in which some slender thread is pulled and our life is changed. I didn't make a decision. I didn't refuse to make a decision, but somehow something happens that comes along and it makes a difference. Even though we exert our free will and make plans and set goals and proceed with full confidence as though we are in control, it also seems that there's this larger hand at work in directing us through life. The church over the centuries has often taken ownership of this thought to say God is doing all these things in your life to steer you and move you along. I have always been a skeptic about that much certainty. But there are occasions where things have happened that my life changed, almost right in front of me. Sometimes for the good, sometimes it's so wonderful I can't imagine. It's not something that I made happen. Sometimes it's not for the good. Something that comes along and bumps me off of the direction that I've been on. Robert Johnson calls this the effect of the slender threads, a larger hand at work that directs us in life. Is it God? Could be. Is it something else? Is it something unnameable? Could be. Call it fate. See, even in Christian circles, we have a hard time using the terminology fate or blind luck. Is it destiny? Is it the hand of God? Is it God's will? To be honest with you, there are times where I do not know what to call it, but that it happens. Call it what you will, but you know there are events and plans that we control. And then there are these intrusions and surprises we don't control. Things that come along that pick us up and move us in a new direction that we did not originate, we didn't think of. If we had thought of it, we probably wouldn't have done it. But yet those things come along. At the same time that Saul was knocked off of his mount, God was speaking to Ananias in the little town. The same time, simultaneously maybe. God's got Saul, he got him on the ground, he's blinded him. This is the way the story is told to us. At the same time, there's a voice that comes to Ananias about the role that he might play. He was a disciple. Was he a leader? It doesn't say that. It might have been that he was just a disciple. He was not the leader of the community, we don't believe, nor was he described as particularly heroic or courageous. Was he really jazzed about getting this assignment? No. He says to God, you know who this is, don't you? Do I need to tell you who this is? I know who it is. We all know. We've heard of him. Ananias was a common man, and the voice interrupted his personal concerns of safety and security. Ananias made a cameo appearance in Saul's conversion. These two stories come together. That's why, to me, it feels like a sitcom. That everything is, the way the story is orchestrated and organized, that it's brought together. And at the same time, as Saul was on the ground, Ananias gets the assignment. We know nothing about him or after this scene. There's nothing about his historical footnote that is carried by any of the documents. Only that he had this singularly supreme, important job in the history of the church. And the assignment was, you're the one to go visit. You're the one to walk over to where Saul is being hosted. You're the one to walk over and to help him with his identity. Saul was to take the name of Jesus to the Gentiles and the kings and to the people of Israel. It wasn't long before Saul took a new name. This is my friend David becoming Phoenix. Saul became Paul. And sometimes that happens with these dramatic changes. Jesus' voice was heard, but he wasn't the one who led Saul by the hand to Damascus. More often, God chooses everyday people to do God's work. Someone that I've grown up around, and he's no longer with us, but his name is John Claypool. And John would talk about how that God speaks to us in the language of people and events. This is one of his conclusions in the self-formation that he went through upon the death of his daughter to leukemia. He began to understand that God is at work in the world, sometimes in the events, sometimes in the people that we run into. And God chooses nothing special people. These aren't the leaders of anything. These are the everyday citizens. And they become members of a supporting cast of characters of God's work. Mostly they're unnamed. History does not record most of them, but they're remembered for their faithfulness. And more often than not, God uses supporting cast members to shape and guide great events that go into the amazing story, this story of salvation. Saul turned into Paul is remembered in the Bible, while Ananias and many, many others are mostly forgotten. That Christian community in Damascus, they had a lot they had to figure out. This is the test of our welcome. Can we be a welcoming and affirming congregation? What if Saul, the church hater, shows up? Can we welcome Saul, the church hater, the Christian hater, as a church? Can we be that kind of a church? Maybe you vaguely known this story, but you couldn't pick Ananias out of a lineup. And that's a shame because he deserves our consideration. The role that Ananias plays may be overshadowed, and the towering sense of Saul turned to Paul would do that. It's his story. The spotlight on the stage follows Paul into the future. Ananias slips back into the covered spaces. When we meet Saul in this story face to face, we don't think about the way in which Saul is torturing the new church. Ananias, on the other hand, greeted him. Did you notice it? He called him Brother Saul. That is the ultimate act of faith, to be able to reach out and to bless Saul with identity and welcome. And in so doing, Saul's sight was restored, and the scales, whatever those are, fell from his eyes, and he could see again. When I imagine the hands of Ananias, I can't help imagining that they're really like the hands of Jesus. In a cameo role, his hands began to act and to do on behalf of God's love, much like Jesus' hands would have done. Maybe it was a cameo role, but for us, it's the main thing. Can we become a part of the love of God in the world by the actions and the enormous sense of bravery that we go through in doing so? Thank God for Ananias. Thank God for the way in which God is at work in the world. We give thanks for Brother Saul. Amen.